Every weapon is made for a specific purpose. Some are defensive, some are offensive, and there are those that were made specifically to cause as much suffering as possible to the enemy. It is about such unique weapons of antiquity and will be discussed in this selection. Khopesh, a type of cold weapon of ancient Egypt with a sickle-shaped blade. In form and function, it is something between a sword and an axe. Khopesh quite successfully combines the features of both of these weapons. This weapon can chop, cut, stab. The first mention of it appears in the New Kingdom, the last, about 1300 BC. Most often the khopesh worked like an axe. In practice, it is impossible to stop its blow with the blade alone. It breaks through. During experiments on a plywood shield without a 10 millimeters thick shackle, a training khopesh with a blade thickness from 4 to 8 millimeters and weighing 1.8 kilograms broke through it without problems. Blows with the reverse side of the blade easily penetrated the helmet. A battle ring or kako is a non-lethal Japanese weapon that consists of a small hoop around the finger and riveted, welded spikes, usually 1 to 3. The warrior usually wore 1 or 2 rings, 1 on the middle or index finger and 1 on the thumb. The rings were most often worn with the spikes facing inward and were used when it was necessary to grab and hold a person, but not to kill or deeply injure them. However, if the kako was turned with the spikes facing outward, it turned into serrated knuckles. The purpose of the kako was to subdue the enemy, not to kill him. These combat rings were especially popular with kanoichi, female ninja. They used the poison-coated kako for quick, fatal attacks. Chuangu is a sword with a hook-shaped tip, a dagger-shaped tip, and a serpent's guard. As a result, a warrior armed with such a strange weapon was able to fight at different distances, as close to and away from the enemy at a distance from the tip of the sword. The front part of the blade, the concave part of the garda, the tip of the hilt, and the outer side of the hook were sharpened. Sometimes the inner side of the hook was not sharpened, which allowed to perform a grip on this part of the weapon and strike as an axe with the same month-shaped garda. All this variety of blades allowed to combine techniques, both at a long distance and up close. The dagger of the hilt could be hit with reverse movements, the sickle, garda, not only to cut the opponent, but also to hit in a castellated way. The sword hook not only allowed to strike with cutting or slashing movements, but also to hook the opponent, seize his limbs, hook him, clamp, and block the weapon, or even tear it out. It was possible to hook the chuangu with hooks, and thus suddenly increase the attack distance. Another Chinese weapon, the iron hand of the juo, was a long stick, at the end of which was attached a copy of a human hand with huge claws that easily tore off pieces of flesh from the body of opponents. The weight of the juo itself, about 9 kilograms, was enough to kill an enemy, but with claws it looked even more terrifying. If used by an experienced warrior, it could drag soldiers off their horses. But the main purpose of the juo was to tear the shields from the hands of enemies, leaving them defenseless against the deadly claws. Essentially, a metal armband that ends with a semicircular shaped point. It served for defense, successfully blocking the blows of the enemy, as well as for striking one's own blows. The wounds from the skizzer were not fatal, but very unpleasant, leading to profuse bleeding. The skizzer was lightweight and 45 centimeters long. The Roman gladiators were the first to use the skizzer, and if you look at pictures of these fights, you can definitely recognize the skizzer on most of the warriors, represented an improved combat chariot with horizontal blades about 1 meter long on each side of the wheel. The Greek commander Xenophontus, a participant of the Battle of Cunaxa, tells about them as follows. They were thin scythes extended at an angle from the axis, and also under the seat of the chaser, turned to the ground. This weapon was used mainly for frontal attack on the enemy's formation. The effect here was calculated not only on the physical elimination of the enemy, but also on the psychological moment, which demoralizes the enemy. The main task of the sickle-bearing chariots was the destruction of infantry fighting orders. During the 5th century BC, the Persians were constantly at war with the Greeks. It was the Greeks who had heavy-armed infantry, which Persian horsemen found difficult to defeat. But these chariots literally terrified their opponents. A flammable mixture used for military purposes during the Middle Ages, it was first used by the Byzantines in naval battles. The Greek fire apparatus was a copper pipe, a siphon, through which a liquid mixture was ejected with a rumbling sound. Compressed air was used as an expulsive force or bellows like blacksmith's bellows. Presumably, the maximum range of siphons was 25 to 30 meters. So initially, Greek fire was used only in the Navy, where it posed a terrible threat to the slow and clumsy wooden ships of the time. In addition, according to contemporaries, Greek fire could not be extinguished by anything, as it continued to burn even on the surface of the water. Morgenstern, literally German for morning star, a cold weapon of percussive crushing action in the form of a metal ball equipped with spikes. It was used as a tip of sticks or pickaxes. Such a tip greatly increased the weight of the weapon. The Morgenstern itself weighed more than 1.2 kilograms, which had a strong moral effect on the enemy, intimidating him with its appearance. The kusarigama consists of a kama sickle to which an impact weight is attached by a chain. The handle of the sickle can be up to 60 centimeters long and the blade up to 20 centimeters long. The blade of the sickle is perpendicular to the handle. It is sharpened on the inner, concave side and ends in a point. The chain is attached to the other end of the hilt, or to the sickle's tip. Its length is about 0.5 meters or less. The technique of working with this weapon allowed to strike the opponent with a weight, or to entangle him with a chain and then attack him with the sickle. In addition, it was possible to throw the sickle itself at the opponent and then return it with a chain. In this way, kusarigama was used in the defense of fortresses. Macuahuitl, an Aztec weapon resembling a sword. Its length, as a rule, reached 90 to 120 centimeters. Sharp pieces of volcanic glass obsidian were attached along the wooden blade. The wounds from the use of these weapons were horrific because of the combination of the sharp edge enough to decapitate an opponent and the jagged edges that tore flesh. The last mention of the macuahuitl dates back to 1884.